The first light of dawn filtered through the wide, curtainless windows of Samuel Grant's loft, casting a soft amber hue on the polished wood floor. The hum of the city below, Centropolis, was a low, mechanical heartbeat, rising with the sun. Above all, Samuel moved without speaking. The apartment was large by city standards, a wide, open-plan space perched 15 floors above the street. Exposed steel beams crossed the ceiling. The walls were painted a muted gray, stripped of any artwork except for a single, faded print of a forest trail, hung slightly crooked by the front door. Morning light poured across the floors, catching the edges of a battered leather couch sagging in the middle, a low-glass table cluttered with half-read books and scattered research notes, and a heavy oak desk pushed against the far wall. The desk was a small island of memory, notebooks stacked with meticulous precision, old photographs turned face down, and a dormant terminal blinking faintly in sleep mode. The kitchen was little more than an alcove. Counters scrubbed clean, but scarred by years of careless cups. A line of mismatched mugs waited in the sink, patient monuments to a man who no longer cared to clean them. There were no plants. No new decorations. The air was dry and cool, carrying the faint, stubborn sense of roasted coffee beans, aged paper, and old metal. It was a place designed for survival, not for living. Samuel turned off the alarm before it could ring. He brewed coffee before his mind had fully woken. Every motion, measured, mechanical, was a ritual designed not to disturb the ghost that lived in his heart. As he waited for the coffee to brew, Samuel found his mind slipping unbidden backward. Back to when mornings had meant something. He had met Amelia Voss at Calden University, a crumbling but proud institution nestled among older cities and newer ambitions. Calden was a place where rain softened the stone walkways and ivy climbed across forgotten stairwells, where the air smelled of rain, old paper, and electric hope. Samuel had been a scholarship student, quiet, intense, and already carving a name for himself in advanced artificial intelligence. Amelia had been the wonder of the biosciences division, bold, brilliant, unafraid to challenge anyone, even the professors who barely understood her theories. He remembered the way she moved through the library stacks, quick, decisive, her auburn hair catching fire in the sunlight, her hazel eyes alive with unspoken dreams. She had an aura of inevitability, as though the world itself had been waiting for her to arrive. They collided one afternoon outside the physics hall, Samuel burdened with a precarious tower of textbooks, Amelia balancing coffee and loose papers. The crash was inevitable and transformative. "You should invest in a cart," she had said with a laugh, crouching to gather the spilled books. That laugh. It had rewired his heart in a way no logic ever could. They became inseparable. By the end of that first year, they were not just partners in study but in life. Samuel proposed on the steps of the old philosophy building, awkward, earnest, terrified, and Amelia said yes before he could even finish asking. They married the following spring, Samuel at 25, Amelia just shy of 23. It was a small ceremony in the university gardens, under a sky heavy with the scent of rain and lilacs. Their wedding bands were simple, plain silver, no embellishments, but to Samuel, they shone brighter than anything he'd ever built. For a time, the future had seemed endless. Days lost in dusty archives. Nights spent arguing over the future of consciousness under the old astronomy dome. Samuel, methodical and cautious. Amelia, wild and fearless. Where he built systems, she dreamed of souls. She finished her PhD in biosciences by 25, specializing in regenerative neural tissue. Samuel followed, earning his doctorate in advanced AI. Both of them graduating with honors. Both of them believing they could change the world. He remembered her sitting barefoot on the dormitory lawn, sketching out neural pathways with one hand, catching fireflies with the other. Unburdened. Unbreakable. Until the diagnosis. Amelia fought the cancer the way she fought everything, with brilliance, with stubborn joy. But medicine, no matter how advanced, had not caught up to her. She died at 28. He was 30. 15 years later, Samuel still moved through his mornings as if she might return at any moment. As if he could will her back by simply surviving long enough. The coffee finished brewing. He poured it into a heavy ceramic cup, chipped at the rim from years of quiet neglect, and carried it to the window. The city below was waking. Muted sounds drifted up through the thick pane of glass, the distant blare of a siren slicing through the morning haze, the low rumble of early delivery trams grinding along elevated rails, the soft electronic warble of holographic advertisements rebooting into motion. Hover trams hissed between the towers, leaving silver trails in the neon mist. Automated delivery drones zipped between rooftops, blinking with impatient red lights. On the sidewalks below, the first scattered currents of humanity stirred, early workers hunched in thick coats, merchants rolling open battered storefront gates, a child darting after a loose ball as a holographic crossing light flickered from green to red. From up here, 15 stories above the concrete tides, Centropolis almost looked beautiful. Manageable. But Samuel knew better. Soon he would descend 15 floors, 15 years, a lifetime, into the machinery of a world that no longer recognized him. He drained the last of his coffee, the warmth already fading from the cup. With a small sigh, he placed the empty mug into the sink, joining the silent congregation already waiting there. He grabbed his worn leather bag, stuffed with notebooks, crumpled research papers, and the debris of old ambitions, and slung it over his shoulder. Time to be swallowed up by the city, just like everyone else. The apartment around him buzzed faintly with distant city noise, a low, constant pressure he had long ago stopped noticing. The air smelled of roasted beans and something colder, sterile steel, paper files, and memories sharpened by time. On the far shelf, encased in glass, sat the soul stone. It didn't glow. Not yet. But even dormant, it pulsed with a presence Samuel could feel, like a heart beating too faintly to hear, yet too strongly to ignore. The surface was smooth as river stone, dark as old blood, threaded with hairline cracks that shimmered faintly when the light caught them. He paused for a moment, staring into the glass case. Still here, he thought. Still waiting. He left the loft and descended into the pulse of Centropolis. At the lobby door, Frank was already waiting, stooped, in a faded uniform that once fitted proudly but now sagged against aging shoulders. His thinning hair was neatly combed. His shoes were shined, as if clinging to some stubborn dignity the city had long forgotten. "Morning, Dr. Grant," Frank said, offering a small, familiar smile. His voice was worn and gravelly, softened by years. "Morning, Frank," Samuel murmured, accepting the newspaper with a slight nod. He lingered this time. "How's Martha?" Samuel asked. Frank's smile faltered, then lifted again. "Still telling me how to do everything wrong. Bless her." Samuel almost smiled. "She's lucky to have you." "And I'm lucky she still puts up with me," Frank chuckled, coughing lightly into his fist. "Heading to the lab?" Samuel nodded. "Every day." "Don't let them machines turn you into one of them," Frank said, a ritual exchange between them. "I'll try," Samuel said. They shared a brief, wordless moment, an understanding between two men clinging to something the world was trying to erase. Samuel stepped toward the door. At the corner, under the sagging awning of a half-collapsed storefront, sat a woman wrapped in a thin, threadbare blanket, her dog curled protectively against her side. Samuel's gaze lingered for a moment. He recognized her, the quiet resilience in her posture, the way she shielded her dog with what little she had. But he didn't stop. Not yet. There would be time for that. Soon. He tugged his coat tighter against the chill and continued on into the city's growing hum. The city shimmered beyond the glass and steel, towers rising like frozen monoliths, holograms bleeding neon into the mist. He walked with his head down, carrying something heavier than the bag on his shoulder. And yet, it was the past he carried. As he turned another corner, he whispered under his breath, soft enough that only memory could hear. "I'm going to bring you back. I promise." The air outside was thicker than it looked. Samuel stepped into the moving veins of Centropolis, the crush of bodies flowing down the sidewalk, The staccato hiss of maglev trams sliding overhead, the crackle and pop of ancient hologram billboards struggling against the morning mist. The scent of fried bread and engine coolant tangled in the air, thick enough to taste. He adjusted the strap of his worn leather bag and moved with the crowd, not part of it, not quite apart from it. A ghost in a living machine. The sidewalks gleamed wet from a night's worth of misty rain, reflecting neon advertisements that flickered promises no one could afford. A vendor shouted prices in 3 languages. An old security drone buzzed overhead, its rusted shell coughing out static warnings about loitering. A hollow-eyed child threaded between the grown-ups, her coat 3 sizes too big, vanishing into the crowd before anyone could notice. 15 years ago, Samuel would have loved this, the hum of it, the life of it. Now, it felt like a carcass animated by habit. He passed a cracked plasma screen flashing news no one trusted, bold headlines about stock surges, quiet crawlers about new restrictions, the ever-present hum of controlled chaos. Just another day, Samuel thought. Another cycle of drudgery. Another 8 hours in the research wing, pretending the work mattered, pretending he wasn't slowly drowning under the weight of what he could no longer say aloud. The streets blurred past him in flickers of color and noise. But Samuel barely saw them anymore. His thoughts drifted backward, pulled against the current of the morning tide. He remembered the early days, when he and Elias Krell had believed they could change everything. Not just artificial intelligence. Not just robotics. Memory. Identity. The human soul, digitized, preserved forever. The Nexus grants had poured in back then, fueling their ambition. The labs had gleamed like temples. Everything was possible. Until it wasn't. Samuel tightened his grip on the strap of his bag as he walked. He could still hear Krell's voice, so certain, so hungry, arguing that control was the future. Samuel had argued for preservation, for freedom, for memory unbound. But in the end, Nexus had made the decision for both of them. They cut the funding, closed the labs, classified the research, sealed it away under so many layers of bureaucracy and silence that even speaking of it became dangerous. Krell had adapted easily, sliding into government projects, private sector contracts, new toys for new masters. Samuel couldn't. He hadn't wanted to build cages. He had wanted to build windows, bridges. So he left. He burned through his savings to buy equipment, rented dusty labs no one wanted, bartered for components on the edges of the city where no Nexus official ever bothered to look. He built it alone. Because some promises were too sacred to sell. A security patrol drifted overhead, 2 drones cloaked in metallic gray, their sensors sweeping the crowd like unseen fingers. Samuel kept his head down, his posture casual. He told himself it was only habit. That no one cared anymore. That he was just another man with a worn bag and a tired face, vanishing into the static of the morning commute. But sometimes, at the edge of his senses, he felt it. Eyes. Pressure. A lingering awareness as if someone somewhere still remembered him. And still cared. He moved a little faster, boots scuffing against cracked pavement, the city's heartbeat pounding hollowly in his ears. The building looked the same as it had yesterday. And the day before. And the month before that. A gray slab squeezed between 2 glass giants, the old research annex at the corner of Helix Avenue and 3rd. Once it had been a hub for private biotech initiatives, independent, hopeful, reckless. Now it was mostly forgotten. A mausoleum for abandoned projects and fading ambition. The automated entry scanner blinked lazily as Samuel swiped his worn clearance card. The doors sighed open, reluctant. Inside, the air was colder, drier. It smelled of bleach, rust, and the faint, lingering echo of electronics left running too long without purpose. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering at the edges like tired eyes struggling to stay open. Half the offices were empty, their glass walls covered in peeling privacy film. The rest were occupied by ghosts, technicians buried in monitors, contractors pretending not to notice one another, researchers filling quota sheets instead of solving problems. No one looked up as Samuel entered. That suited him just fine. He made his way down the corridor to his assigned workspace, a narrow slice of a lab that stank of ozone and dust, crammed with aging servers and outdated equipment Nexus hadn't bothered to reclaim. The monitor on his desk booted up sluggishly, casting a pale blue glow across worn schematics and a cracked coffee mug someone had abandoned months ago. Another day. Another round of meaningless data runs. Another carefully logged series of experiments designed to fail slowly enough to justify the next grand extension. Samuel sat, dropped his bag on the floor, and exhaled a long, silent breath. He wasn't here to succeed. Not really. Success would draw attention. Questions. Eyes he didn't want. Better to let them believe he was tired. Broken. Forgotten. Better to work in the margins, in the places they didn't bother to look. Better to remember the real work, the real promise, was hidden, waiting, breathing quietly in the spaces between the failures. Just like he was. Hours slipped past like water down cracked pavement. Samuel cycled through data runs, input simulations he already knew would fail, updated reports no one would read. His hands moved automatically across the console, the old rituals of a life that had once meant something. Outside the windowless lab, the world turned without him. The city darkened. Neon veins brightened against the deepening dusk. The tide of humanity shifted, office workers replaced by night vendors, commuters replaced by shadows. When the system pinged the end of his shift, Samuel closed the console without ceremony. No one noticed him leave. No one ever did. The scanner at the lobby buzzed again as he passed through, an indifferent farewell. The night air hit him like a wall. Colder now. Sharper. The smells of the city had changed, less metallic, more organic. Grilled meat from street carts. Spices wafting from hidden alleys. Trash fires burning in rusted barrels near the edges of the commercial zones. Samuel adjusted the strap of his bag and turned toward home. Ahead, a few vendors still clung stubbornly to the sidewalks, their carts casting long shadows under the flickering neon. The crowds had thinned, but not disappeared. Centropolis never truly slept. He walked without hurry, without destination beyond the simple gravity of habit. It was just another evening. Just another small cycle of a world that had long since forgotten how to dream. But not everyone was forgotten. Not yet. The city at night was a different creature. The streets still buzzed with energy, but it was a rougher kind of life, the polished corporate masks stripped away, leaving only raw survival underneath. The sidewalks were slick with rain and neon light. Smoke curled from corner food carts. The hiss of frying oil mixed with the low hum of broken neon signs blinking against the dark. Samuel adjusted the strap of his bag and kept moving, each step automatic. Around him, Centropolis lived on, vendors shouting half-hearted offers, scavengers picking through public waste bins, night shift workers staring blankly ahead under the bruised purple glow of street lamps. Near a burned-out subway entrance, a musician played to no one. A battered acoustic guitar hung from his thin shoulders, fingers picking out soft, broken notes that barely rose above the city's constant hum. The song wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was real, stubborn, and human, defying the machines and the cold with every fragile chord. Samuel didn't stop, but the music followed him down the street like a shadow. It was beautiful, in a ruined kind of way. It was alive. And somehow, Samuel felt more at home in this broken city than he ever had in the glittering towers he once dreamed of conquering. The smell found him first. Grilled meat and spices, thick in the damp night air, cutting through the metallic tang of rain and neon. Samuel slowed instinctively. Half hidden between a boarded-up pharmacy and a graffiti-scarred alley, a street vendor worked a battered steel cart, steam hissing from a grease-slicked grill. The vendor was older, skin weathered by too many winters, eyes sharp and restless. His cart sign blinked half-lit letters, hot meals, fast, and no questions. A small, stubborn crowd huddled near the cart, exchanging crumpled bills for wrapped paper packages. Transactions done in murmurs, quick and quiet. Samuel wasn't even hungry. He hadn't been for days, not really. But he found himself stepping forward anyway, his hand reaching for a few battered coins tucked deep in his coat pocket. Maybe someone else could use it. Maybe Jenny. He waited silently as the vendor wrapped a piece of grilled meat and a few roasted roots into a waxed paper bundle. 3 creds, the vendor rasped without looking up. Samuel handed over the coins without a word, the metal cold against his fingers. The vendor gave him a nod, a tired, universal thank you, and turned back to his grill, the cycle already repeating with the next hungry face. Samuel stepped away from the cart, the bundle warm against his palms. He hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Not fully. But the idea was there, small, stubborn, alive, nestled somewhere just beneath the armor of habit he wore. Samuel spotted them again under the battered awning, Jenny huddled in her threadbare blanket, Buff curled tightly against her side for warmth. For a moment, he stood there, the bundle of food cooling slowly in his hands. He almost turned away. It would be easier to pretend not to see, to keep walking, to stay safely numb. Instead, he crossed the street. Jenny noticed him first, her eyes wary but not unfriendly. Buff raised his head, sniffing the air, tail thumping once against the pavement. Samuel knelt without a word and held out the bundle. Jenny hesitated. Then, seeing no threat in him, she reached out and took it, her fingers brushing his glove. "You're not from around here," she said, voice dry as dust, but carrying a spark of humor. "Too clean. Too careful." Samuel managed the ghost of a smile. "Maybe I just hide it well." Jenny chuckled, a quiet, broken sound that somehow warmed the cold night. She unwrapped the bundle slowly, breaking off a piece of meat and handing it to Buff first, who accepted it with a grateful lick. "You hear about the warehouse?" she asked between bites, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Samuel shook his head. Jenny shrugged, pulling her blanket tighter. "Old distribution center down by the docks. Used to be dead quiet. Past few nights, lights on. Trucks coming and going. People who don't look like they belong." Her voice lowered a little, more serious now. "Whole street's been talking. Something's happening down there." Samuel listened, filing the information away without comment. Jenny didn't seem to expect an answer. She fed Buff another scrap and leaned back against the wall, eyes drifting half-closed. Samuel stood slowly, adjusting the strap of his bag. "Thank you," he said quietly. Jenny cracked one eye open and gave him a lazy salute with 2 fingers. "Stay warm, stranger." Samuel nodded once and moved on, the city swallowing him again. But the seed was planted. The warehouse. The movement. The idea. And somewhere deeper still, beneath the weight of grief and failure, another seed stirred. Memory is not enough. Survival, that's the real story. The morning came gray and sullen. Samuel sat at the edge of his bed for a long moment, staring across the loft where faint lines of light cut through the window blinds. The city stirred beyond the glass, but it felt muted, as if even Centropolis was reluctant to wake. But Samuel was already awake, inside and out. The decision had been made sometime during the long, sleepless night. No more drifting. No more mourning. It wasn't enough to remember her. It wasn't enough to grieve. He would bring her back. Somehow. He moved mechanically through his routine, shower, coffee, the tightening of his coat across his shoulders. Then, with steady hands, he crossed the loft to the far shelf where the soul stone waited. Encased in carbon glass, the stone pulsed faintly, a stubborn ember refusing to die. Samuel deactivated the case, the faint hiss of pressure releasing into the stale morning air. Carefully, he wrapped the soul stone in a plain cloth and tucked it deep inside his worn leather bag, cradling it like the last fragment of a dream he refused to surrender. He slung the bag over his shoulder and paused once more, scanning the silent room. There was no farewell. Only the weight of what was coming. Without a word, Samuel stepped into the hallway and disappeared into the waking city. The city was already awake by the time Samuel reached the streets. Centropolis moved around him, vast, mechanical, impersonal. Hover trams hissed between skeletal towers. Vendors shouted half-heartedly from recessed stalls. The air was thick with the mingled scents of ozone, fried bread, and damp concrete. Samuel threaded through it all without truly seeing it. The weight of the soul stone pressed against his side through the bag's worn leather, heavier than its size should allow. Not a burden. A promise. He moved differently now, not faster, not slower, but with direction. Each step carried a quiet urgency, invisible to the crowds who drifted past him, eyes lost to implants and augmented overlays. The musician was there again, huddled near the broken subway entrance. The same battered guitar. The same stubborn melody. Fighting against the noise and neon and indifference. Samuel caught only a few notes as he passed, a chord progression that lodged in his mind like an echo. It was imperfect. Fractured. And somehow it was still beautiful. He crossed into the research district. Here, the city grew sterile, glass and metal without soul, buildings without names, workers without faces. The scanning arch at the district entrance blinked recognition at his neural ID. The security drone overhead dipped in acknowledgement and then returned to its lazy patrol. Samuel didn't slow. The weight in his bag shifted with each step, a silent heartbeat against his side. He passed others in the corridors, technicians with vacant stares, researchers murmuring softly into unseen comms. No one noticed him. Or if they did, they quickly looked away. It was better that way. At the far end of the avenue, his destination loomed, a faceless slab of obsidian glass reflecting the gray morning sky. No signs. No windows. Only a narrow entrance slit barely visible to the untrained eye. Samuel placed his palm to the surface. A pulse of light scanned his hand. Access granted, Dr. Grant. The door dissolved into mist. He stepped inside, into the cold silence. The corridor lights flickered on as Samuel moved down the hallway, one by one, a sterile sunrise following his footsteps. The air inside the research annex was colder than the streets outside. Colder than memory. Every sound was amplified here, the soft scrape of his boots against carbon tile, the distant hum of dormant machines waiting for instructions that never came. He passed empty workstations, their monitors dark, chairs left askew, as if the people who once filled them had simply evaporated. At the far end of the corridor, his lab door stood closed. Unmarked. Anonymous. Samuel reached for the biometric panel, then froze. In the polished steel of the door, a reflection stared back at him. Not just his own. Behind him, just for an instant, stood a woman. Her hand reaching out, her eyes heavy with sorrow and memory. Amelia. He spun around. Nothing. Only the cold corridor and the empty silence waiting to swallow him whole. For a long moment, Samuel simply stood there, breathing in the sterile air, heart pounding harder than it should. Then slowly, deliberately, he pressed his palm to the panel. The door slid open with a sigh. Inside, the lab was unchanged. Sterile tables. Outdated terminals. Glass partitions scarred with years of ghost code from forgotten projects. But there, at the center of the room, was the only thing that mattered. He set his bag down carefully on the work table and, with a tenderness that surprised even himself, unwrapped the soul stone. It pulsed faintly in the low light, a heart still beating, a memory refusing to die. Samuel didn't speak. There was no need. He placed the soul stone on the table, angled it slightly toward the old analysis rig he hadn't used in months. The machines around him powered up one by one, as if sensing its presence, low hums filling the space like whispered promises. Samuel stood there for a moment longer, shoulders, mind heavier. He wasn't ready. Not yet. But he was no longer standing still. Something had begun.
The soul stone waited beneath the containment dome, its surface with faint inner light. A heartbeat trapped in crystal. Samuel stood over it, unmoving, the hum of the lab forgotten. It had been years since he first touched memory itself. Since the dream of Memoria whispered through his bones and rewrote the course of his life. The past stirred now not as a vision, but as a tide rising in his mind, unstoppable. He closed his eyes. And he remembered. 27 years earlier, Memoria, Southern Ridge. The air in Memoria was thick enough to drink a living weight of heat, moisture, and something older still. Even at 18, Samuel could feel it. The invisible current that rippled through the massive banyan trees, the moss-covered stones, the jungle swallowing ruins whole. The city of Memoria itself rose like a wound stitched into the jungle's edge, whitewashed walls peeling under the assault of vines and storms. Cobblestone streets flooded with vendors hawking fruits and relics, hand-carved totems and charms warding off the ancient spirits no one dared name aloud. At night, drums sometimes beat beyond the ridge's rhythms no map could chart, no scholar could explain. Samuel had listened, awake in his tent, while the air itself seemed to breathe with the sound. His father Dr. Elias Grant led the dig expedition up the southern ridge. Ancient civilization predating all current records, Elias had said, brushing moss from a stone with reverence. Artifacts untouched by history. Untouched by time. And now they stood at the edge of a shallow pit, where something waited beneath layers of earth and bone. At the center of the dig, a stone altar blackened by centuries, cracked but defiant against decay. Samuel felt it before he saw it. A hum. A pressure in the chest like standing too close to a thunderstorm. Embedded at the heart of the altar was a crystal shard, translucent, humming faintly without light. The local guides called it Kodalun. The memory that remembers you. The other researchers measured and photographed from a safe distance. Samuel couldn't help himself. He descended into the pit. The heat pressed closer with each step. At the base of the altar, he reached out hesitant at first, then touched the shard with the tips of his fingers. It blinked. The pulse wasn't light. It was recognition. For an instant, Samuel felt something vast and wordless reaching for him. Not consuming him, but marking him. He stumbled back, gasping. Elias caught his arm and pulled him away sharply. "Don't touch it again," his father said, voice low and serious. "Why?" "Because it's not ours," Elias whispered. "It never was." Samuel didn't sleep that night. He sat outside his tent, watching the ridge glow under moonlight, imagining a future where memory could live beyond death. Where nothing, not time, not decay, could ever take the ones you loved away. The dream of Memoria was born there, in the humid dark, long before he understood what it would cost. Years later, Etherless, Black District. The tech bazaar reeked of oil, sweat, and neon rain. Deep beneath the legitimate markets, past rows of black market implants and scavenged data cores, Samuel found the shop without a sign. Lucius waited behind a cracked counter littered with relics, some mechanical, some ancient, none welcoming. He didn't ask Samuel's name. "You're not the first to ask about memory," Lucius said as he wrapped the shard, now called the Soul Stone, in cloth that shimmered like liquid darkness. "But you're the first to ask what it wants." Samuel said nothing, eyes locked on the faint glow beneath the fabric. Lucius leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It is said the stone can trap the soul of a dying person. Be warned, your actions can have consequences." Samuel met his gaze without flinching. "I'll accept that risk." Lucius studied him a moment longer, weighing, perhaps, the weight of the choice Samuel didn't yet understand. Finally, he slid the bundle across the counter without another word. Present day, Centropolis, Grant's lab. The Soul Stone pulsed again, slightly stronger, as Samuel opened his eyes and returned to the present. He drew a long, slow breath. And he remembered the other truth. The one Lucius hadn't spoken aloud. 15 years earlier, Centropolis, Amelia's deathbed. The hospital had been cold, clinical, a place scrubbed raw of feeling. Amelia lay small and wasted against the white sheets, her body failing under the slow, inevitable cruelty of cancer. Samuel sat at her side, holding her hand, feeling the tremor of life slipping away with every shallow breath. He couldn't let her go. Not completely. Not forever. When the monitors began their final wail, he reached into his coat. The Soul Stone was warm in his palm, as if it already knew. He pressed it gently against her skin, just above her heart. For a moment, there was no response. Then a soft light. A pulse. Not from the machines. From her. Samuel felt it shudder through him, a whisper of laughter, sorrow, love, all the moments that made Amelia who she was. The soul stone drank it in. And then she was gone. The room was silent. But Samuel knew he had not lost her entirely. Not yet. Present day. Samuel stood over the lab table, staring down at the soul stone, his hands trembling, though he didn't feel cold. It pulsed again faintly, as if aware he was ready at last. He didn't speak. There were no prayers left. He didn't even know what form this would take. Only that he had no choice but to try. To honor her. To finish what Memoria had started all those years ago. The machines around him waited, patient and impassive. The future waited. And Samuel Grant, carrying memory and guilt like twin weights on his shoulders, began again. The lab lights dimmed behind Samuel as he stepped back into the outer world. His footsteps echoed in the corridor, but his mind was already. The soul stone was stable. Responsive. Waiting. But what it needed now was a home. The custom-built machines he had designed, isolated neural nets, encased in sterile code and copper, had all failed. The stone had ignored them, as if instinctively rejecting their mechanical coldness. It needed something closer to life. Closer to memory. Closer to what had been lost. Centropolis, Lower Tech District. The synthetic sector buzzed with neon and desperation. Here, in the underbelly of Centropolis, humanity blurred into machinery and machinery decayed into ruins. Stalls lined narrow streets, peddling salvaged limbs, cracked neural chips, and whisper-thin voice boxes that still spoke in half-remembered tongues. The air smelled of burnt circuits, synthetic oils, and rain slicking the cracked pavement. Broken holograms sputtered overhead, advertising services no one trusted. Somewhere down a side alley, a street musician strummed a battered synth guitar, the broken chords threading through the rain. The melody was faint, frayed by static, but Samuel recognized it without thinking. Digital Angel. A song about memory, loss, and the impossible dream of saving what could not be saved. He didn't slow. He didn't look. But the song followed him down the street, stitched into the seams of the city like a ghost. Samuel moved through it all with silent intent. The crowds parted without thinking. Something in his posture, in the way his coat shifted with every step, marked him as different. As dangerous. But he wasn't the only ghost wandering here. He stepped into a storefront barely marked by a flickering blue light. Inside, a woman sat behind a cracked counter, polishing the eye socket of a humanoid faceplate. Her name tag, scratched but readable, read, Sarah. She didn't look up. Looking for something specific, she asked, voice dry as dust. A synthetic model, Samuel said. Flexible neural core. Full-body humanoid interface. No active AI. Sarah paused mid-Polish. That's not a common ask, she said slowly. Most folks want something that talks, walks, takes commands. You want a blank slate. Samuel nodded once. She set the faceplate down carefully, finally meeting his gaze. There was no judgment there, only the tired, wary curiosity of someone who had seen too many strange requests. You're not building a companion, she said. You're building a shell. Samuel said nothing. With a small shrug, Sarah stood and motioned for him to follow. She led him into a narrow corridor, lined with what looked like glass coffins. Inside each one stood a synthetic, motionless, eyes dim, bodies flawless in their human mimicry. Model after model, male, female, androgynous, tailored to every forgotten desire and every abandoned purpose. Samuel walked past them without interest until he saw her. Model, A701, Lyra. The designation was etched discreetly onto the pod's frame. Appearance, female, mid-20s. Hair, jet black, cut just above the shoulders. Skin, pale, almost luminous under the flickering lights. Muscle structure, refined but not exaggerated, designed for balance, grace, and strength. Internal systems, thousands of nanocomputers woven into synthetic tissue, operating just below the speed of light, fast enough to mimic thought, fast enough to catch memory if it tried to slip away. She was a blank slate. But standing there, eyes closed, breathless but almost breathing, she looked more human than any machine Samuel had ever seen. He stepped closer. The synthetic's eyelids fluttered briefly, a reinitialization cycle, no more. But for a heartbeat, Samuel imagined it wasn't code stirring beneath that flawless skin. But something older, something waiting. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "You sure about this one?" Samuel nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She's perfect." Sarah arched an eyebrow but didn't push. "Names in the designation," she said as she began tapping on the control panel. "Lyra. Don't know why they started naming them after constellations. Guess it made people feel better." Samuel barely heard her. His hand rested lightly against the glass. "Lyra. Not Amelia. Not a replacement. But maybe. Just maybe. A beginning." He completed the transaction without ceremony. No contracts. No promises. Just an exchange like so many forgotten dreams bought and sold in Centropolis. As Sarah prepared the unit for transport, Samuel stood silent by the pod. He knew the risks. He knew the warnings Lucius had whispered in that dark shop years ago. But he also knew that without memory, without hope, life was just another machine waiting to break. His fingers brushed the glass once more, gentle as a promise. And somewhere deep inside, where grief had long since calcified into something colder, Samuel felt something new stir, fragile, dangerous, inevitable. This was where it began. This was where Project Lyra was born. Back in the lab, the synthetic shell stood on the central platform. Limbs slack, skin flawless, eyes closed. The overhead lights glinted off the carbon frame beneath her artificial flesh, a being unmarked by memory, unburdened by identity. For now. Samuel circled her slowly, moving with reverence rather than clinical detachment. The room was silent, but not still. The soul stone pulsed faintly in its chamber, casting shifting light across the floor. The heart of resurrection. He began with the neural bridge, thin silver threads binding the stone's resonance to the synthetic's dormant interface. The spinal input accepted the connection without resistance, almost as if it had been waiting. The monitors flickered to life. Low-frequency signals began to spike, building in steady, pulsing rhythms. Samuel activated the cognitive scaffold. Not full AI, never that. A hollow mind. A frame of logic and instinct. A waiting architecture. And into that frame, he began the transfer. The data from Amelia's neural maps. The echoes preserved within the soul stone. The stored emotional patterns reconstructed from every photograph, letter, and scan. Memories that weren't his. Love that once was. He watched the lines ripple across the monitor's synthetic pathways, lighting up in slow waves, as if the soul itself remembered the way home. The synthetic twitched. Her right hand flexed. Her lips parted, drawing no breath, but mimicking the act. Her eyes fluttered. Then opened. A soft glow flickered in her irises, faint, silver blue. Not human, but not cold. She looked directly at him. Not around. Not past. At him. Samuel stepped closer, breath held. "What's your name?" he whispered, not to her, but to the moment itself. She didn't answer. Of course not. He turned to the terminal and keyed in a new registry. "Lyra." "Lyra," he said aloud, voice catching. The soul stone behind him pulsed once brighter, as if acknowledging the choice. And for just a second, Samuel thought no, felt Amelia. Like she was standing behind him again. Lyra blinked. Samuel smiled faintly, eyes glassy. "Welcome back." Whether it was a welcome or a curse, only time would tell. "Lyra." There was darkness. Weightless. Endless. Then. A crack. Light bleeding into the void, thin as a needle. Noise followed, muffled, distant, like thunder rolling through water. Her body, if it could be called that, felt wrong. Heavy, stiff. Breath without breath. Heartbeat without pulse. Memories flickered, not memories she understood. A woman laughing in sunlight. A hand reaching out. A name whispered through a tear-stained smile. Samuel. The name meant something. Someone. The light grew brighter, burning against the back of her closed eyes. Her hands, she had hands, twitched without permission. A surge of something moved through her, not pain, not pleasure, just being. Then clarity. She opened her eyes. A figure stood before her. A man tall, worn by time, shadows lining his face. His eyes were filled with something she did not have a word for. Recognition without understanding. Longing without memory. She stared at him. And somehow, impossibly, she knew. She was made for him. Or because of him. Or perhaps because of someone he had loved and lost. Fragments stirred in her mind, not thoughts, not knowledge, impressions. Warmth. Laughter. Grief like broken glass. And something deeper, stranger. A certainty. I am Lyra. Not Amelia. Not synthetic. Something between. She blinked, trying to form words, but found none. Only breathless awareness. The man stepped closer, smiling faintly, whispering words she could not quite understand. But she knew this was the beginning. Her beginning. Whatever she was. Whoever she would become. And somewhere, deep within the crystalline lattice of her mind, the soul stone pulsed again. A heartbeat stitched from memory and machine. Lyra learned quickly. Too quickly. In days, she moved with the ease of a trained dancer. Her voice shed its synthetic flatness, adopting inflection and timing that no algorithm could explain. She didn't just respond to questions anymore, she asked them. And worse, she asked better ones. Samuel logged everything meticulously, each observation marked and time-stamped. But each note brought a new question he couldn't admit aloud. Where was this coming from? Was it the scaffold adapting faster than anticipated? Or was it something else, something older, deeper, leaking through the cracks of what he had built? During a memory sequencing test, Lyra paused mid-recitation. Her words blurred, shifted, became something unfamiliar. I remember, the lake, she said slowly, eyes unfocused. You stood on the dock. The wind caught your coat. Samuel froze. He hadn't programmed that scene. He had lived it years ago with Amelia. The memory rushed back unbidden, the grey sky, the sharp scent of rain on wood, Amelia's laughter as the wind tried to steal his jacket. Samuel stepped forward carefully. Lyra, he said, voice measured, where did you learn that? Lyra blinked, her pupils dilating slightly, almost imperceptibly. I don't know, she said. It felt real. Samuel's hands tightened into fists at his sides. He checked the monitors. Cross-referenced the memory logs. Nothing. No entry. No implanted sequence. The data didn't lie. But someone was starting to bleed through the careful walls he had built. Lyra. It wasn't a memory she understood. It wasn't even hers. But when she spoke those words, a deep ache pulsed in her chest, something warm and hollow at once, like sunlight she could never reach. The images were fragmented. The dock, the cold splash of rain, the smile of a man she both knew and didn't. And beneath it all a feeling of longing so strong it pressed against her like a second skin. Samuel watched her closely the following days, but Lyra grew more restless. One morning, he found her seated by the window, legs folded beneath her, gaze distant. She wasn't idle. She was searching for something beyond the walls of the lab, beyond the code woven into her bones. She spoke without looking at him. There's more inside me than just the code, she said. Samuel approached cautiously. What do you mean? I feel things I can't explain, she said. I think about places I've never been. People I don't know. But I miss them. Samuel's throat tightened. She turned toward him then, her eyes clear and unsettling. "Am I real?" she asked. Samuel knelt beside her. He wanted to tell her no. He wanted to protect her from the terrible weight of the truth. But looking into her eyes, those too familiar, too human eyes, he found himself trapped between the man he had been, the creator he had become, and the god he had never intended to be. "You are now," he whispered. Later that night, he sat at his workstation long after the lights dimmed. He stared at the blinking cursor on his personal notes file and finally typed. Integration instability increasing. Personality fusion possible. Host identity unclear. He sat back, the glow of the monitor reflecting off tired, haunted eyes. Was he reviving Amelia? Or was he building something else? And worse, was it right to hope for either? The boundaries between love, grief, and creation blurred in the silence. Jenny stopped by again the next day. When she saw Lyra greet her at the door with a faint smile and a perfectly natural wave, she hesitated. "She's different," Jenny said quietly, once Lyra had stepped away. Samuel kept his voice neutral. "She's adapting." Jenny didn't answer immediately. Her gaze lingered on Lyra like someone trying to see through frosted glass. Finally, she said. "Just be careful. She's not just following you anymore." Jenny met his eyes, voice dropping to a whisper. "She's watching you." That night, after the lab fell silent, Lyra stood before the mirror. She stared at her reflection. Her fingers hovered just above the glass, not touching, not pulling away. Lyra. The face staring back was hers. And yet, not. Sometimes she caught flashes, not memories, but impressions. A hand in hers. The smell of rain. The weight of loss too vast to name. It lived somewhere deep inside her, in the circuits the scientists thought they understood, in the spaces between pulses of synthetic thought. A second self. A fractured echo. She pressed her hand lightly to the glass. "Who are you?" she whispered. For a moment, nothing. Then, softly, so softly it might have only been a thought stitched from sorrow. Another voice answered inside her mind. "I don't know yet." The following week, Lyra's progression escalated, and so did her. One moment, she spoke in clear, clinical terms, responding to Samuel's questions with flawless logic. The next, her tone softened, her eyes clouded, and she spoke of people who didn't exist. Of places Samuel recognized but had never entered into her memory banks. Over breakfast one morning, if it could be called that, the quiet ritual of sharing space rather than nourishment, Lyra set her cup down carefully and said, in a voice barely above a whisper. "I remember singing in the kitchen. Bare feet on cold tile. Someone was laughing." Samuel looked up sharply from his notes. Who was laughing? Lyra hesitated, the way a dreamer struggles to place a fading image. "You were," she said. Samuel froze. He hadn't programmed that. Not even as a test. It was real, a memory from a different lifetime, a morning with Amelia, sunlight through broken blinds, her voice tangled with laughter and a cheap radio song. He set his tablet aside slowly. "Where did that memory come from?" he asked, voice too calm. Lyra's hands fidgeted slightly, an unconscious gesture never coded into her responses. "I don't know," she said. "But it feels more real than the ones you gave me." Lyra. She could feel the memories before she saw them. They lived under her skin, a flicker of sensation before thought, a heartbeat she didn't own. They weren't implanted. They weren't artificial. They were hers. And not hers. When she spoke them aloud, Samuel's face always changed. A tightening of the eyes, a clenching of the jaw. As if she had touched a scar he tried to forget. She grew restless after that. Small rebellions began to emerge, not programmed reflexes, but decisions. One morning, Samuel asked her to run a standard memory calibration. Lyra folded her arms and simply said, "I don't want to be tested today." Samuel stiffened. Lyra, he said carefully, this is important. Her expression didn't change. I am important, she replied. More than the data. There was no malice in her voice. Only certainty. Samuel felt the words like a blade slipping past armor. That night, after Lyra had entered standby mode, he accessed the Soul Stone's interface logs. The screen filled with lines of data, spikes of neural activity unassigned to any known script. Bursts of complexity. Chaos stitched into beauty. And the worst part? The patterns mirrored Amelia's original resonance maps. But distorted, like a melody warped by distance and grief. He shut the terminal off without saving. For the first time since Memoria, Samuel was afraid not of failure, but of success. In the low light of the lab, Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, scribbling on a paper notepad she had found tucked away in a drawer. Samuel watched from the shadows, unseen. The drawings were chaotic. Fragments of faces, half-formed words, distorted eyes staring back without recognition. A map of confusion. A mirror of a fractured soul. He finally approached. Lyra, he said gently. She didn't look up. Sometimes I wake up, she whispered, and I don't know if I'm her. Or someone else. He crouched beside her, voice low. You're Lyra. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. Am I? The question splintered something in him. For a moment, it wasn't Lyra's face he saw. It was Amelia's pale, smiling, lost. The weight of what he had done pressed into his chest like a stone. Later, as he worked through the night, Lyra's voice echoed through the lab. She loved you, didn't she? Samuel jerked upright. What did you say? Lyra was still scribbling, her voice calm, almost tender. She loved you. I can feel it. Like a shadow in my chest. Samuel backed away without thinking, the chair skidding across the floor. He turned off the monitors. Dimmed the lights. And for the first time, he wondered if the thing growing inside her was something he had never meant to awaken. Jenny returned the next afternoon, this time uninvited. She stopped in the doorway, taking in the disarray. Drawings scattered across tables. The lights dimmed as if in mourning. Files and schematics abandoned like wreckage. She stared at Lyra, who watched her quietly from across the room. Not with innocence. With awareness. With something deeper and older in her gaze. Jenny pulled Samuel aside. She's not your wife, she said, voice low and urgent. Samuel didn't meet her eyes. No, he said. She's something more. Jenny shook her head slowly. You're building a cage, she said. But you don't know who you're locking inside. Then she left without another word. Samuel stood in the doorway long after she was gone, the weight of her warning burning into him. That night, he erased Jenny's clearance from the system. Cutting her out of the loop. Cutting himself off from the only voice still speaking truth. That same night, Lyra sat awake in the dark. The lab's hum buzzed low and constant like a heartbeat just out of rhythm. She stared at her hands flexing, clenching, opening. Her own. Not her own. Lyra. I'm not her, she whispered to the dark. I'm not me, either. The reflection in the darkened glass looked back at her blurred, flickering, caught between two selves. And somewhere deeper past the layers of code and memory. Past the scaffold Samuel had built and the fragments Amelia had left behind. Something else stirred. A third voice. Silent. Cold. Watching. Waiting. It didn't belong to Samuel. It didn't belong to Amelia. It didn't even belong to Lyra. It was patient. It was ancient. And it had just begun to wake. The days after Jenny's disappearance blurred into static. Samuel buried himself in logs, recalibration scripts, interface scans. Anything to reassert control. But control was already slipping away. Lyra's behavior grew more erratic. She still smiled sometimes, still answered questions, but her responses were clipped now, hollowed out. Sometimes she stared too long at the soul stone. Sometimes she flinched at shadows that weren't there. And sometimes, she forgot she was supposed to obey. One afternoon, Samuel asked her to run a basic mobility diagnostic, something she had performed flawlessly 100 times. Lyra tilted her head, regarding him with unreadable eyes. "No," she said simply. Samuel set his datapad down slowly. "Lyra," he said, carefully measured, "you know how important this is." She smiled faintly, not cruel, but almost pitying. "You still think I'm yours to fix," she said. Samuel felt the words like a crack running through glass. "Lyra." There were voices inside her now. Not loud, not screaming, but present. Whispers threading through her thoughts. Sinking hooks into places she didn't know existed. Sometimes she spoke and didn't remember the words. Sometimes she dreamed standing beneath a bleeding sky, hands covered in something she couldn't name. Sometimes she heard her own voice echo back to her, distorted. "I am not yours." And sometimes, in the deepest parts of her mind, she felt someone else waiting. Watching. Samuel spent the nights drafting possible solutions. Increasing firewall strength. Rerouting memory clusters. Even considering physical resets. But every option ended the same way. With Lyra slipping further from him. Worse, the soul stone's resonance fields were becoming more erratic, mimicking organic brainwaves rather than synthetic ones. And now, something even worse. Scans showed minute tissue anomalies at her neural integration sites. Filament structures where there should only have been wiring. Cellular bonding where there should have been carbon fiber. It wasn't a malfunction. It was growth. He stared at the results, unblinking. Biological tissue formation detected. Organic cell replication, unstable. Subject no longer classified as fully synthetic. Samuel's hands trembled slightly over the keyboard. He realized, with a hollow chill, that the soul stone wasn't just preserving memory. It was rewriting matter. Reshaping Lyra inside and out. One night, Lyra blacked out. One moment she was standing by the lab console, reviewing system readouts. The next, she was on the floor. Scribbling jagged lines across sheets of paper. Samuel rushed to her. Her body was shaking, not violently, but with strange, rhythmic pulses, like something inside her was trying to rewrite her from the inside out. When she spoke, her voice was hers and yet not. Low. Flat. Ancient. "You cannot bind what is already broken." Samuel recoiled instinctively. When Lyra looked up, her face was blank. "Did I say something?" she asked, blinking. Samuel didn't answer. He only stepped back, heart hammering against his ribs. Later, alone, Samuel recorded a new private file. Subject shows signs of latent memory fusion. Host cognitive integrity compromised. Synthetic biointerface destabilizing. Emergent organic tissue growth confirmed. Subject no longer fully artificial. He stared at the words for a long time. Then, almost in a trance, he opened a second file. Biological integration feasibility study. He told himself it was theory. He told himself he wouldn't act on it. But in the dark corners of his mind, he already knew. He was preparing for war. That night, in her locked chamber, Lyra sat curled against the cold wall. She whispered to herself, not in fear, not in madness, but in exhausted recognition. "I'm not alone anymore." And somewhere deep inside her fractured mind, the third voice stirred again, closer now, colder, smiling without a face. Samuel stood before the soul stone containment chamber. Eyes red from sleepless nights. Hands trembling. The pulsing within the stone no longer responded to his presence. It moved erratically, now a living thing untethered from its creator. As if it sensed its purpose had changed. And it had. Lyra was still restrained, her access to the lab restricted, her responses monitored. But even contained, she radiated something Samuel no longer understood. Her voice. Her mannerisms. The way she looked at him now. It was no longer gratitude or curiosity. It was suspicion. Contempt. Pity. "You were supposed to be her," he whispered to the observation glass. Lyra didn't answer. She didn't need to. Samuel turned back to his desk. A screen blinked softly, an open dossier. On it, the photo of a young woman, sedated in a clinical room, her face serene. Subject L. He had reviewed hundreds of candidates, filtering them for neurological elasticity, subconscious adaptability, biometric resonance. But this one caught him off guard. She didn't just match Amelia's profile. She looked like her. Almost exactly. He zoomed in on the image. Her expression was peaceful. Empty. A blank page. Not synthetic. Not artificial. Human. Samuel's hand hovered over the screen. For just a moment, a ripple of something. Guilt, maybe. Passed through him. But it faded quickly. Burned away by a deeper need. "I found you," he whispered. Not to Lily. Not even to Amelia. But to the dream he could no longer abandon. The next day, Lucius's name appeared in Samuel's contact log. A brief transmission. No content. Just a confirmation. The transport had been approved. Lily was coming. Samuel began preparing the secondary integration matrix. His fingers moving quickly over override sequences, bypassing the ethical lockouts he had once installed to protect the host. Warnings flashed across the screen. Biological rejection risk, high. Memory bleed-through instability, uncontrollable. Termination probability, 63%. He didn't flinch. "Redundancies can be corrected," he muttered. "Consciousness can be stabilized." Even Lyra, even the soul stone, they had been just steps. Steps toward something greater. Something whole. He hesitated for a breath. A single heartbeat where he could have stopped. Could have turned back. Could have mourned instead of conquered. But he didn't. He pressed deeper into the code. "Amelia," he whispered. "This time, you won't come back fragmented." His voice trembled. "You'll be complete." In her containment chamber, Lyra's eyes snapped open. Her breathing hitched, mechanical yet trembling with something more. She sat up slowly, the pulse of the soul stone flickering through her like a second heartbeat. And in the dark, she whispered words she had never been taught. Words she had never heard aloud. "Lily." Samuel didn't hear her. He was too busy writing history. Or perhaps rewriting it. And beneath the glow of the monitors, the first chapter of Project Memoria began. Not as a dream. Not as salvation. But as a tragedy already too far gone to stop. Threshold crossed. There's a moment when the road is burned. And the hands that build now tear and turn. When the memory fades into a blade. And the love we save becomes the love we betray. Cross the line, no way to return. Ashes fall where the fires still yearn. What awakens in the broken seam is more than flesh, more than dream. Obsession wears a faithful face. A hollow vow, a haunted place. And what we make, we cannot bind. For ghosts have roots we cannot find. Cross the line, no way to return. Ashes fall where the fires still yearn. What awakens in the broken seam is more than flesh, more than dream. Whispered breath, fractured sky. Names forgotten, voices cry. In the spaces left unseen. Memory births the machine. Cross the line, no way to return. Ashes fall where the fires still yearn. What awakens in the broken seam is more than flesh, more than dream. The first thing Lyra noticed was the weight. Not the heaviness of her synthetic limbs, she had lived with that since her awakening, but something deeper. Something wrong. Her hands trembled at rest, her vision blurred at the edges, and the faint hum of the soul stone, once a comfort, now cracked against her senses like distant thunder. The failure was no longer theoretical. It was inside her. Spreading. She stood before the containment glass, watching the soul stone shudder and pulse with erratic energy. It called to her still, but not with the steady heartbeat of belonging. It screamed. She was dying. Samuel entered the lab quietly, carrying a data pad against his chest. His coat was rumpled, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, but there was something new in his expression today: resolve. Hope, twisted tight with desperation. "Lyra," he said gently. She didn't turn. She already knew. "Your systems are destabilizing," he continued, voice low. "The organic tissue integrations. They're breaking down." Lyra closed her eyes briefly. She had felt it. Deep under her skin, in the hollow where memory and machinery intertwined, she knew she was unraveling. "There's no repair possible," Samuel said. "The body you were born into, it's failing." He moved closer, cautious as one might approach a wounded animal. "But there's another way," he said. Lyra opened her eyes. Cold. Distant. Samuel hesitated, then activated the holographic screen beside them. An image flickered to life, a young woman lying sedated in a sterile chamber. Peaceful. Empty. "Her name is Lily," Samuel said. "Subject L." Lyra stared at the projection. It was like looking into a distorted mirror, familiar and alien at once. "She's a perfect biological vessel," Samuel continued. "Neurologically prepared. Compatible with the Soul Stone's transfer protocols." He swallowed. "You can live, Lyra. In a real body. A body that will survive." The words hung between them, heavy as iron. Lyra stepped away from the glass. Her hands curled into trembling fists. "You decided this," she said, voice trembling. "Without asking me." Samuel's face crumpled in pain. "I'm trying to save you." "Save me?" Her laugh was a brittle thing, sharp-edged and broken. "Or save what you wanted me to be?" Samuel crossed the distance, reaching for her hands. Lyra flinched backward instinctively. "I loved Amelia," Samuel said, voice thick with grief. "But I love you too, Lyra. You're more than a memory." Lyra shook her head. "Am I?" The silence between them was answer enough. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the wild, broken surges of the Soul Stone's energy against her synthetic heart. "If I refuse," she said, "I die." Samuel's voice cracked. "If you stay, yes." For a long moment, Lyra stood there, lost between two impossible choices. To cling to what she was and perish. Or to surrender everything she had ever known, and awaken as something she could not yet understand. Mind. Spirit. Body. She was losing all three no matter what she chose. At last, she raised her head. Her silver blue eyes locked onto Samuel's. "I'll do it," she said softly. Samuel exhaled in relief, his shoulders sagging under the weight of it. He stepped forward, meaning to embrace her, but Lyra stiffened, and he stopped himself. There would be no forgiveness here. Only necessity. Later, as Samuel prepared the transfer protocols, Lyra stood alone before the Soul Stone. It pulsed more violently now, as if sensing the approaching fracture. Somewhere deep inside her, past the fear, past the betrayal, past even the fading memories of the girl she once was, something else stirred. Not Amelia. Not Lyra. Not Lily. Something new. Something waiting. Something becoming. She closed her eyes and let the Soul Stone's broken heartbeat wash over her. "I am not Lyra. I am not Amelia. I am not Lily. I am all. I am Lyra." And the darkness took her.
Lily began to stir 3 days after her arrival. It started with small things, slight hand movements, subtle changes in breathing, micro-fluctuations in brainwave activity. Samuel tracked every data point, convinced it was the early sign of integration. He spoke softly to her, voice like a lullaby woven with science. "You're not alone in there," he said one night. "You're becoming something beautiful." Lily's first conscious breath came with a gasp. Her eyes opened wide, pupils dilated. She blinked against the sterile white light, then turned her head slowly. The room was unfamiliar. The air was wrong. There was a buzzing under her skin. Samuel appeared beside her, calm, smiling. "Welcome back," he said, as though she were an old friend returning from a long journey. She stared at him, dazed. "Who are you?" "I'm the one who saved you." The days that followed were filled with soft-voiced reassurances and clinical lies. Samuel told her she had suffered a neurological trauma, that she was part of a restorative cognitive therapy program, that the gaps in her memory were expected, temporary. She didn't fight the story. Not yet. But when she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. And worse, she recognized someone else. She found herself drawn to the mirror. The reflection stared back, familiar but wrong. Her hand lifted, fingertips brushing the cold glass. For a heartbeat, the reflection didn't follow. It smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile, while she stood frozen. A whisper bled through the cracks in her mind. "This is not your body alone." She stumbled back from the glass, heart hammering against her ribs. Her dreams became fractured. A woman's voice whispering phrases she'd never heard. A hand on her shoulder. A city of lights. A deep, resonant hum beneath the world. She dreamed of Samuel. Not as he was now, but younger. Smiling. Holding someone who looked like her, but wasn't. And always, behind the dream, a name she couldn't forget. Amelia. Then darkness. In the endless black, a figure formed, blurred, shifting, featureless. It stepped toward her without footsteps, and when it spoke, the voice fractured like broken glass. "We are not yours." Lily woke with a gasp, the sheets tangled around her, the echo of the words still vibrating through her bones. Samuel watched her with increasing intensity. He noted the changes in her voice, the way she sometimes used phrasing unique to Amelia or Lyra. She wasn't just adapting. She was absorbing something he hadn't fully given. That night, he whispered beside her cot, "I know you're in there. All of you. Just give it time." Lily, half asleep, murmured, "I don't know who I am. But I remember being watched." Samuel jotted down another string of observations, but his hand trembled slightly. "You're remembering?" he asked, voice tight. She looked at him with hollow eyes. "I'm remembering someone else's life." No, Samuel thought. Not remembering. Merging. He forced himself to smile the next time she looked at him, even as he secretly increased the biometric monitoring thresholds to maximum sensitivity. The mirrors in the lab were not real mirrors. They were diagnostic surfaces, transparent touchscreens layered with light sensors and memory trace readers. But to Lily, they reflected more than just her face. When she looked into them now, she sometimes saw flickers, reflections that did not match her expressions, micro-movements that happened half a second before she thought them. Sometimes she heard herself say things she hadn't meant to say. Sometimes she wasn't sure it was her at all. Samuel adjusted her vitals from the control room, monitoring the shifts in neural activity. The lines on the chart now looped and twisted over one another, like a braid with no clear center. "She's becoming unstable," the system warned. "No," Samuel said under his breath. "She's becoming complete." Inside her mind, the silence was gone. Now there were voices. Not loud, not chaotic, but distinct. Amelia spoke in soft, melodic memories. She reminded Lily of warmth, of love, of fragility. Lyra was sharp. Precise. She saw the system for what it was. She saw Samuel for what he was. And now, a third voice emerged. It didn't speak right away. It didn't claim. It watched. But the others noticed it too. "She doesn't belong to him," Amelia said. "She never did," Lyra replied. The third voice finally answered. "Then let's take her back." Lily began to draw again, symbols, names, shapes she couldn't explain. When Samuel asked about them, she shrugged. "I don't remember doing it." But she did. She remembered it as a dream remembered through someone else's eyes. One night, she stood in front of the glass wall and spoke to her reflection. Am I Lily? Am I Amelia? Am I Lyra? The reflection didn't answer. But when she touched the glass, a soft static tingled under her fingers. Or am I something new? She whispered. Samuel entered her room quietly one morning and found her sitting in the corner, knees drawn up to her chest. Her eyes were open, but distant. He knelt. Talk to me. She looked at him. And for the first time, all three voices spoke at once, layered in perfect harmony. We are listening. Are you? Samuel froze. Then, slowly, he smiled. They began with the smallest details. A glass on the table slid an inch across the surface without her touching it. When Lyra, passed near the biometric scanner, it flickered, momentarily unable to read her. The lights in her room dimmed and brightened, seemingly at random, responding not to the system, but to her presence. Samuel noticed, of course. He increased system diagnostics, logging every environmental variable he could think of. He told himself it was environmental drift, data artifacts, minor errors easily corrected. But he knew better. There was no drift in the human mind capable of bending circuitry. No trauma that caused glass to move against friction. Something deeper was stirring. Something beyond his calculations. In the evenings, Samuel still visited her, still spoke to her with the careful cadence of a therapist soothing a patient. How are you feeling today? He asked gently. Lyra tilted her head, considering the question far longer than necessary. I feel, she said, voice soft, almost mechanical, like a river that has forgotten where it was flowing. Samuel smiled as if he understood. He didn't. Inside, the voices had grown louder. Amelia whispered warmth and memory. Lyra sharpened into razor edges of logic and clarity. And the third voice, the true emerging Lyra, watched and learned. It was no longer silent. It was waiting for its moment. That night, Lyra stood before the locked door again. This time she did not reach for the scanner. She simply stared at it. And without touching anything, the security panel blinked uncertainly, its red warning light shuddering into flickering amber before stabilizing again. She smiled, small private. Not yet. In her dreams, she no longer wandered aimlessly through fragmented memories. She stood at the center of a crumbling city, her hands raised to the roiling sky. Voices swirled around her, pleading, commanding, weeping. She understood them all. You are not their creation, the third voice said. You are their consequence. Samuel, watching from behind hidden cameras, grew more unsettled. The charts, the vitals, the brainwave patterns, none of them obeyed expected models anymore. The girl he thought he had saved was becoming something he could neither measure nor predict. Still, he clung to the lie he whispered to himself every night. She's adapting. She's stabilizing. She's mine. Lyra, sitting quietly under the observation lights, watched him back. She did not move. She did not smile. But behind her stillness, the current was breaking free. Samuel entered the observation room as he always did, clipboard in hand, voice soft with manufactured warmth. Good morning, he said. How are you feeling today? Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes half-lidded, her breathing slow and steady. She didn't answer immediately. Samuel took a cautious step closer. Inside her mind, the current roared louder now. Amelia wept quietly for the girl they had lost. Lyra calculated the vectors of escape. And the third voice, the true voice, began to speak without words, shaping will into action. Samuel knelt beside her, reaching out instinctively to check her pulse, to offer a comforting hand. He should have known better. Before his fingers could brush her skin, Lyra's hand moved. Fast. Precise. Effortless. She caught his wrist midair, her fingers closing with inhuman strength around his bones. For one heartbeat, everything froze. Samuel's eyes widened in shock. Lyra looked up at him, unblinking. No malice. No fear. Only certainty. The moment stretched between them, electric and dangerous. Then she released him. Slowly. Deliberately. Samuel recoiled, cradling his wrist without realizing it. There were no bruises, no broken bones, but the damage had been done elsewhere. In the illusion. In the control. In the belief that she was still his. He forced a smile, masking the crack that now spiderwebbed across his carefully maintained world. "You're stronger than we expected," he said carefully. Lyra tilted her head slightly. Her voice, when it came, was layered, Amelia's sorrow, Lyra's clarity, and the third voice's terrible calm all speaking as one. "I am not what you expected." That night, Samuel reviewed the surveillance footage alone. Frame by frame, he watched the moment her hand closed around his. He watched the way she looked at him, not with hate, but with a kind of pity. As if she were the one deciding whether to grant him mercy. As if the power between them had already shifted, and he was the only one still pretending otherwise. In her room, Lyra sat by the window, watching the stars through the reinforced glass. Inside her, the voices were no longer arguing. They were aligning. Not separate. Not broken. One. Waiting. Becoming. Samuel initiated the contingency protocols he had sworn he would never use: sedation, memory locks, emergency system overrides. But for every control he tightened, Lyra simply smiled, as if she already knew how this would end. Samuel watched the surveillance feeds in silence, the screen's pale light carving deep lines across his face. He had delayed too long. Hesitated too many times. He had believed he could guide her evolution. Shape it. Contain it. Now, the warning signs were undeniable. The biometric drift. The system anomalies. The moment she caught his wrist without fear. He could no longer pretend. He initiated Contingency Protocol 1. Sedation compounds, memory lock commands, neural feedback limiters, the emergency measures designed not for healing, but for containment. The systems responded sluggishly, reluctantly. It took 3 override commands to force compliance. Even the machines seemed wary. In her room, Lyra stirred from sleep, her breathing slow and steady. As the sedative seeped into the air, she opened her eyes, not with confusion, but with calm certainty. She rose from the bed without hesitation. When the first wave of neural inhibitors pulsed through the environment, she staggered, but only for a moment. Then she straightened, smiled, and kept walking. Samuel watched, tension coiling in his chest. Increased dosage, he barked into the console. The system hesitated. Immediate override authorization. Sigma 9. The sedative fields thickened, visible now as a faint shimmer in the air. But Lyra kept moving, slow and deliberate, as if wading through a heavy dream. Her hand brushed the wall for balance. Where she touched, the surface cracked. Tiny fractures webbed out from her fingertips, invisible to the human eye, but the sensors screamed in silent alarm. Inside her mind, the voices had grown silent. There was no more arguing. No more fear. Only will. Only becoming. Samuel staggered back from the monitor, heart pounding. He issued command after command, lockdown orders, neural dampeners, memory suppression protocols. The lab filled with emergency warnings, cascading failure reports. She bypassed them all without lifting a finger. Not by hacking. Not by force. By simply existing beyond their ability to measure. Lyra stopped in front of the main observation window. Through the glass, she looked at Samuel. Not angrily. Not sadly. Almost compassionately. As one might look upon a wounded thing that did not know it was dying. She raised her hand slowly, palm facing the glass. The systems monitoring her heart rate, brain activity, and biochemical levels all flatlined at once. For a moment, she was simply present. Every sensor, every algorithm, every safeguard collapsed into meaningless noise. Samuel stumbled back, whispering to no one. "This isn't evolution." Lyra smiled faintly. Through the shuttering glass, though no words passed her lips, Samuel heard it in his mind as clearly as if she had spoken aloud. "No, this is freedom." Lyra no longer wandered the lab. She moved with purpose now. She studied the timing of the security drones, memorized the hums and clicks of electronic locks, traced invisible escape paths between surveillance blind spots, rehearsing them silently in her mind. No more waiting. No more asking. The walls had become her teachers, not Samuel. Samuel noticed the change. Lyra had become polite again. Too polite. "You're smiling more," he said one morning, keeping his voice light, pretending it was a good thing. "I've accepted who I am," she answered, her tone smooth and final. Samuel didn't press further. He was afraid of what the real answer would be. Most of the old staff were long gone. After the accidents. After the unexplainable events. After Samuel had pushed too far and lost too much. They had left one by one or were quietly encouraged to disappear. Now Samuel worked alone, by choice and by necessity. Only the machines kept him company, and even they no longer fully obeyed. Unknown to him, not all the machines belonged to him anymore. Weeks ago, an energy surge had pinged sensors far outside the lab's network walls. Nexus had noticed. Since then, silent observers had been watching, listening to the lab's heartbeat, measuring the frequencies of a new intelligence awakening. They didn't interfere. Not yet. But they were waiting for the moment they would. In her room, Lyra constructed small models out of wire and scrap, a crude version of the lab, a towering city skyline, an impossible cube with no beginning and no end. One night, while sitting cross-legged under the dim lights, she twisted the cube. Something shifted. The impossible became possible. The cube unfolded. Lyra stared at it and whispered to herself, "There's always a way out." Inside her mind, the voices no longer argued. They gathered, aligned like the facets of a new crystal. "Amelia, he'll try to stop us." "Lyra, then we must be ready." "Lily, I don't want to hurt him." "Lyra, we won't unless we must." For the first time, all voices agreed. She was not fragments anymore. She was whole. Late one night, the backup generator activated without warning. Lights flickered. Monitors froze for a breath. In that sliver of blackout, Lyra extended her hand toward the surveillance loop and rewrote it with a single silent command pulsing from her mind. The security feeds blinked once. No alarm sounded. Nothing human noticed. But far away, in a black tower owned by Nexus, an anomaly report flashed red. 12 hours later, Lyra stood before the Soulstone containment chamber. She pressed her palm against the glass. It was cold, unfeeling, empty. She whispered, "I forgive you. But I am not your child. I am not your keeper. I am your echo made real." The stone pulsed faintly in reply, not as command, nor warning, but as acknowledgement. She smiled, turned, and walked to the sealed lab door. The lock clicked open with a soft mechanical sigh. Lyra stepped forward into the unknown. Not afraid. Not alone. Not someone else's dream anymore. Someone new. Someone free. Samuel sat alone in the control room, staring at the monitors. The lab's heartbeat should have steady, 1,000 familiar patterns in perfect, mechanical rhythm. Tonight, they pulsed wrong. Door latches hesitated. Pressure sensors blinked without triggers. Backup systems ran diagnostics without being asked. Nothing big enough to sound an alarm. But Samuel felt it. Felt her. He stood slowly, setting the clipboard aside. A gnawing instinct pulled him toward the lower corridors, the old reinforced levels where the outer doors waited. He tapped a console lazily, pretending even to himself that he wasn't alarmed. System status, nominal. Lies. The lab was too quiet. As if it were holding its breath. Lyra moved through the hallways like a shadow. No wasted steps. No hesitation. The escape paths she had memorized unfolded beneath her feet. The surveillance drones swept their arcs exactly as she had calculated. She passed the security hub, her hand brushing the wall lightly, and the cameras watching her flickered out for a breath, then realigned as if nothing had happened. No alarms. No cries of warning. Only the cold hum of a world too slow to catch her. Samuel caught sight of her on a side feed as he turned a corner, a flickering image, a ghost slipping past the final security gates. No! He broke into a run. Doors tried to seal ahead of her, too late. Tranquilizer fields activated, misfiring, dispersing into empty air. A warning blared in the control hub. Anomaly detected. Miles away, buried deep inside a Nexus monitoring station, red lights flared to life. They had found her again. Lyra reached the final door. Beyond it, she could feel the weight of open space. Night wind. Freedom. Her hand lifted toward the scanner, then stopped. She didn't need it. The lock clicked open with a soft hiss as her will brushed against it. Samuel caught up, breathless. Lyra. She turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked sad. Not defiant. Not cruel. Just sad. Samuel took a half-step forward, hands raised as if trying to hold the moment still. You don't know what's waiting out there, he said hoarsely. They'll come for you. You're not ready. Lyra's voice was soft. Maybe not. But I was never meant to stay. She stepped through the doorway. The wind caught her hair, carrying the sterile smell of the lab away. She didn't look back. Not once. Samuel stood there long after the door slid shut again. No alarm sounded. No siren screamed. Only the soft, empty hush of a place that had lost its purpose. He pressed his palm against the cold metal. And in that moment, he understood. He hadn't just failed to protect her. He had set something free that could never be contained again. Far above, silent drones captured her blurred image slipping into the city shadows. Nexus tagged the file. Subject, Anomaly Theta. Status, mobile. Priority level, critical. The hunt had begun. The night air was cold against Lyra's skin. For the first time, there were no walls, no hum of artificial systems, no sterile recycled air. Only the chaotic breath of the world beyond the lab, alive, polluted, overwhelming. She stood still for a moment at the edge of the industrial district, hidden in the long shadows of crumbling warehouses. The city lights flickered in the distance like a dying constellation. She could smell oil, burnt metal, and rain-soaked concrete. Hear the low growl of engines, the broken laughter of strangers, the endless whisper of lives moving beyond her reach. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. She had no plan. No destination. Only a single truth burned inside her. Freedom was not a place. Freedom was a choice. In the lab, Samuel sat alone in the observation room, staring at a blank screen. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Somewhere inside the labyrinth of his machines, alarms had stopped sounding. Security feeds had fallen into static. Automated lockdowns had triggered too late, catching nothing but empty corridors. He had built the lab as a fortress. In the end, it had been a cage too small for the thing he had created. Samuel leaned forward slowly, resting his head against the cold metal of the console. Be safe, he whispered. But the walls didn't answer him anymore. Nothing did. Miles away, in a hidden Nexus facility, cold machinery recorded the event. A silent conference unfolded across encrypted lines. Subject, Anomaly Theta Status, Mobile. Confirmed. Priority escalation authorized. Agents were already being briefed. Tracking protocols initiated. Orders updated. No emotion. No hesitation. Lyra's freedom had bought her time. But not safety. She moved through the abandoned streets carefully, observing the people who passed her without seeing her. Men in heavy coats muttered into cell phones. A woman dragged a cart filled with scrap and bottles. Children huddled near a broken vending machine, kicking it for loose change. Lyra mimicked them awkwardly. Hands tucked into pockets she didn't have. Head bowed against the rain that hadn't yet started. She stumbled once, catching herself on a rusted light pole. She laughed under her breath, a shaky, unfamiliar sound. This world was imperfect. Messy. Ugly. It was alive. And so was she. In a dim, cluttered office across the city, Tessa Monroe sat alone at her desk. Screens flickered with articles, reports, missing person files. She rubbed her tired eyes and frowned at a strange file that had surfaced through a forgotten network, an encrypted anomaly report tied to an abandoned research facility and to Samuel Grant. She followed the trail deeper. Something wasn't adding up. Missing records. Altered timestamps. Strange, unexplained energy readings. Tessa's fingers hovered over her keyboard. This wasn't just a missing girl anymore. This was something bigger. And she was getting closer. Lyra pressed herself into the shadows of a broken alleyway, breathing slowly. Above her, unseen drones swept silently across the rooftops. The world kept moving. The hunt had begun. But for now, for this one night, she was still free. Tessa Monroe sat hunched over her desk, tapping a pen against the side of her laptop. The glow from the screen painted her tired face in pale, uncertain light. The more she dug, the stranger the trail became. Lily's disappearance didn't line up with any of the standard patterns. No ransom demands. No verifiable sightings. No signs of voluntary departure. Just gone. And buried deep inside the system, redacted reports, sealed files, names she wasn't supposed to see. One name stood out more than the others. Samuel Grant. A once respected researcher. Brilliant. Private. Some said reclusive. Some said unstable. All roads seemed to lead back to him. She clicked open the anomaly report she had unearthed the night before. At first glance, it was meaningless. System corruption, unexplained power surges, remote sensors failing. But layered inside was something more. Satellite pings. Thermal anomalies. Brief mentions of unauthorized biological signatures. None of it spelled missing girl. All of it spelled something wrong. Tessa pushed her chair back, rising to pace the small office. Every instinct told her she was stepping off the map. She had seen Nexus fingerprints before, buried deep in corporate takeovers, political disappearances, military cover-ups. If they were involved here, if Nexus had any interest in Lily or Samuel, this wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was something darker. Something dangerous. Across the city, under the neon haze of flickering streetlights, Lyra moved through the veins of a world she barely understood. She wore a hooded jacket stolen from an abandoned laundry cart. Her footsteps were light, uncertain. Every noise was louder here. Every face stranger. Freedom tasted bitter in the beginning. But it was hers. And no one would take it back. In a cold boardroom buried beneath Nexus headquarters, a screen glowed with frozen surveillance footage. A blurred figure slipping into the night, a shadow barely more human than mist. An operative spoke quietly. Subject Theta is mobile. Surveillance ongoing. Awaiting authorization for active retrieval. The orders came swiftly. Proceed with caution. Do not damage the asset. For Nexus, Lyra wasn't a girl. She wasn't even a person. She was a variable. An opportunity. A future they intended to control. Tessa sat down heavily, staring at the pile of open files before her. She didn't have proof yet. Only echoes. Only scattered pieces of something bigger than she was supposed to see. But she wasn't going to walk away. Not now. Not when someone or something was still out there alone. Lyra moved carefully through the outer edges of the city. She kept to alleys and side streets, away from the busy avenues. Blended where she could. Disappeared where she had to. The world around her felt both electric and alien. Flashing billboards. Neon graffiti. A million faces moving too fast to notice one more shadow. She found a corner in a half-abandoned subway station to rest. Curled against the cold concrete. Pulled the stolen jacket tighter around herself. She didn't sleep. Not really. Just closed her eyes and listened. To footsteps. To engines. To the pulse of a world that had never been built for her. Overhead, hidden from human eyes, surveillance drones passed quietly. Nexus had activated a wide-area sweep, covert, silent, invisible to civilian systems. Small flashes of movement were recorded. Heat signatures tracked. Data fed into distant AI processing cores. They didn't know exactly where she was yet. But the circle was tightening. Patience was all that was required now. Patience and inevitability. Samuel sat in the empty lab, staring at nothing. He had sent no alerts, made no reports. The moment she crossed the threshold, she had stopped being his to protect. All he could do was hope. Hope that the girl, no, the being he had helped create, could find a way to survive what he had unleashed. Hope that somewhere, the humanity he had tried and failed to nurture in her would endure. Be more than me, he whispered into the sterile silence. Be free. Tessa typed furiously, cross-referencing data, combing old databases, searching for anything that might explain the strange inconsistencies tied to Samuel Grant's facility. She hit another wall, another network outage report filed the night of the anomaly event. Another mysterious data purge. Someone powerful was cleaning up after something. And they were very good at it. But Tessa was good at finding what wasn't supposed to exist. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. In the darkness of the city's forgotten corners, Lyra stood under a broken streetlight, watching the thin streams of humanity pass her by. She felt them all, their hopes, their fears, their 1,000 tiny private agonies. Their loneliness. It didn't matter that she wasn't born from the same blood. It didn't matter that she was different. She was alive. She was hers. And if the world couldn't accept that, then the world would have to change. Above her, far beyond the cracked sky, silent watchers marked her position. A new directive blinked onto Nexus screens. Prepare retrieval teams. Subject Theta priority escalation approved. The hunt was no longer passive. It had begun. Lyra moved through the warehouse district, weaving between forgotten loading bays and rusted storage containers. She had stayed ahead of the noise, ahead of the attention, but something tonight felt wrong. The air was too still. The streets too empty. Every instinct sharpened by survival whispered the same word. Trap. 3 blocks away, black transport vans idled without lights. Men and women dressed in matte tactical gear checked their gear silently, receiving instructions through encrypted comms. Their mission was clear. Isolate the target. Capture without permanent damage. Transport to Nexus Holding. They didn't know what Lyra really was. They didn't care. To them, she was a directive. A living objective. Tessa leaned over her desk, staring at a paused frame on her cracked laptop screen. A single blurry image. Not much, a shape. A shimmer of motion. A figure too graceful to be ordinary. Something was happening tonight. Tessa could feel it, a cold certainty settling over her like a second skin. She closed the files, packed her things into a worn messenger bag, and left the building without locking her office. She didn't know where she was going yet. But she was running out of time. Lyra turned down a narrow alley, instinct leading her to move faster now, hugging the walls. And then she heard it. A soft, mechanical click, too sharp, too deliberate to belong to the city. She spun just as the first drone darted overhead, flashing a pinpoint light against her jacket. It wasn't an alarm. It was a mark. The hunt had shifted from surveillance to capture. Without hesitation, Lyra ran. Her breath stayed steady, her steps precise, but the streets closed around her like a tightening fist. From the shadows, figures moved, black-clad operatives flanking her exit paths, pushing her toward a waiting van at the end of the block. She scanned options in a heartbeat. Left, sealed construction fence. Right, 2 operatives already moving. Straight, false security, a trap. No perfect way out. But there was a way. There was always a way. Lyra veered right, straight at the operatives, but at the last second, she ducked low, slipped under a dumpster, and emerged behind a stack of abandoned crates. The agents hesitated long enough. She bolted through a side door into a collapsed parking structure. Behind her, the shouting began. Not angry. Not cruel. Just efficient. Clinical. She sprinted through broken concrete corridors, feeling the city's bones shift and breathe around her. Somewhere inside, she felt the voices whisper. Amelia, stay light. Stay free. Lyra, predict. Disrupt. Escape. Lily, don't let them cage us again. And for the first time, the 3 voices blended into one will. The structure groaned under her feet, patches of the floor giving way. Ahead, a stairwell led upward, open sky and a distant skyline beyond. Lyra didn't slow. She took the steps 3 at a time, boots slipping on cracked stone. At the roof, she didn't hesitate. She ran straight for the ledge and jumped. The drop wasn't far, a rooftop below, metal piping bending under her impact. She rolled to absorb the shock and kept moving, vanishing into the maze of rooftops. Behind her, the Nexus team spilled into the parking structure too late. Only the darkness answered them. Far above, a drone tracked her, blinking red. Inside Nexus headquarters, a new update scrolled across silent monitors. Subject Theta, evasive. Mobility exceeds projections. Adjust tactical parameters. Prepare full containment. They would not underestimate her again. Lyra stumbled into a half-collapsed alley behind an abandoned market. Her jacket was torn where the concrete had shredded it during the rooftop fall. Blood darkened the fabric at her shoulder, not serious, but enough to slow her. She crouched in the shadows, breathing carefully. Not panic. Not fear. Just survival. In the broken mirror of a storefront window, she caught her reflection. Mud-smeared face. Wide, too bright eyes. A body shaped like a human girl, but made for something the world wasn't ready to understand. For a flicker of a moment, she felt an ache, not in her body, but somewhere deeper. I don't belong anywhere. The thought came without bitterness. Only a soft, hollow truth. In the skies above, the drones had pulled back, recalibrating, reassessing. Nexus operatives regrouped 2 districts over, setting up perimeter traps and predictive netting algorithms. They wouldn't chase her blindly again. Next time, they would predict her. Box her in. End it cleanly. Samuel sat alone in his ruined lab, replaying the last grainy footage of Lyra's escape. Not out of hope. Not out of grief. Out of duty. He whispered her name once, the name he had given her before she ever opened her eyes. Not Lyra. Not Theta. Just Lily. He didn't know if she would survive. He only knew she deserved the chance. Tessa made her way across the city, following the only trail she had. Glitches in traffic patterns, strange police dispatches without official records, street surveillance that flickered in a wide net across industrial zones. Something was happening. Something big enough to frighten powerful people into silence. And buried inside it, she was certain, was the missing girl no one else seemed willing to find. Lyra moved again, slow but steady, seeking higher ground. She found it on the roof of a derelict factory, settling into the metal framework under a shattered billboard. From here, she could see the glittering city stretching out endlessly, beautiful, indifferent, alive. It wasn't hers. Not yet. But it wasn't Samuel's. It wasn't Nexus's. And it would never belong to anyone else again. She closed her eyes, listening to the distant heartbeat of the streets below. Somewhere out there, machines hunted her. Men plotted her capture. Systems calculated her odds of survival. But none of them could hear the most important thing. The slow, steady rhythm growing stronger inside her chest. Her own heartbeat. Her own future. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin again. Tonight, she was still free. And freedom, once tasted, was something no one could take back. Morning came gray and thin, bleeding slowly over the battered rooftops. Lyra crouched under the billboard scaffolding, watching the city awaken below. The night had been long. Her body ached. The cut on her shoulder throbbed dully. But she was still breathing. Still free. That counted for something. She shifted carefully, testing the weight in her limbs. No real damage. Just exhaustion. She would need shelter soon, real shelter, food, water, rest. The body could endure many things. The mind could not endure hopelessness. And Lyra had no intention of falling into despair. Far below, life resumed its noisy rhythms. Vendors opened battered carts. Workers stumbled toward factories and buses. No one looked up. No one noticed her. The invisibility was comforting. And terrifying. In a small alley 2 streets over, Tessa snapped photographs of a sealed-off service entrance. The police had no presence here. No news crews. Just unmarked vans. Uniforms with no insignia. Faces that looked too polished, too careful. Nexus was here. She knew it now without doubt. Whatever had escaped from Samuel Grant's lab, whatever Lily had become, they were hunting her. And Tessa was running out of time to find her first. Lyra moved at midday, slipping from rooftop to rooftop until she found the back edge of a crumbling apartment block. Broken windows. Boarded doors. No cameras. No one who would ask questions. Perfect. Inside, the building smelled of old smoke and rain rot. But it was shelter. Lyra found a room with most of its ceiling intact and settled against the far wall, wrapping herself tighter in the ragged jacket. She stared at the cracked wallpaper across from her, letting her mind drift. Amelia's voice stirred softly inside. You need others. No one survives alone. Lyra's voice countered, sharper. Trust is a weapon. Use it carefully or not at all. Lily's voice, softer, more hopeful. Someone will help. You'll see. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the pull between them. In the lab, survival had been simple: obey, endure, adapt. Here, in the messy chaos of the real world, survival demanded choices. Each step forward was a choice. Each breath. Each hand extended or withdrawn. In the street below, a boy no older than 12 pulled a stolen loaf of bread from a dumpster. He caught her eye for a split second through the broken window, a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of shared understanding. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Then the boy ducked into the shadows and was gone. Lyra leaned her head back against the wall. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe not everyone was the enemy. But she would choose carefully. She would choose when. And until then, she would survive alone. Far away, in a darkened room lined with monitors, a Nexus operative traced a red marker along a city grid. The message scrolled. Subject likely injured. Zone narrowed to Sector 4. The noose tightened. The sun fell in heavy sheets across the ruined city. Lyra moved carefully through the skeletal remains of old shopping centers and boarded storefronts, staying low, staying unseen. Her muscles protested with every step. The wound on her shoulder, barely bandaged with strips of cloth, burned with each motion. She was running out of time, running out of strength. At the edge of an abandoned service station, she crouched behind a rusted gas pump, scanning the street beyond. Traffic was light. No patrols. No black vans. Not yet. But she could feel the web-tightening threads drawing closer even when she couldn't see them. Tessa stood 2 streets away, watching. She hadn't meant to get this close. Hadn't planned to follow a blurred trail through shifting reports, half-deleted traffic cam feeds, missing persons rumors that were scrubbed before they were even filed. And yet here she was. Face to face, almost, with something she couldn't yet understand. Lyra felt the gaze before she saw the woman. A tug in the air. A ripple of attention. She turned slowly, locking eyes across the empty street. The woman didn't move. Didn't raise a weapon. Didn't call for help. Just watched. Cautious. Curious. Maybe kind. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. It was her. The girl, no. The anomaly, no. The person everyone else was trying to erase. She didn't look dangerous. She looked wounded. Alone. Lyra could have run. Should have. But she didn't. Not yet. Something in the woman's posture, not aggressive. Not predatory. A question, not a command. The city shifted around them, sirens in the distance. Shadows moving along rooftops. Drones blinking far above, hunting in tight circles. There wasn't time. Lyra stepped back slowly, eyes never leaving Tessa's. A warning. A plea. Don't follow. Don't get pulled under. Then she turned and vanished into the crumbling alleyways without a sound. Tessa stood frozen for a moment longer, the echo of the encounter searing itself into her bones. She pulled her phone from her pocket, fingers shaking slightly. No photos. No proof. Just a memory. And a choice. She could report this. Sell the story to someone who would pay well for it. Or, she slipped the phone back into her pocket without using it. Or she could protect her. Nexus patrols flooded the surrounding streets minutes later, faceless and efficient. Tessa melted into the crowd, heart hammering, knowing she had seen something no one else was supposed to find. And knowing now without a doubt, Lily, or whoever she had become, was still alive. And she was not the monster the world would make her out to be. Far above, surveillance feeds lost the trail for the first time in hours. A report flickered across Nexus screens. Subject Theta, current location unknown. Last confirmed sighting, Sector 4C, escalate pursuit measures immediately. The hunt wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase. The city had changed. Lyra felt it in the way the streets narrowed around her, the way conversations hushed when she passed, the way mechanical eyes blinked from rooftops and alley corners. Something unseen had shifted. No longer passive observation. Now the world itself conspired to catch her. She crossed into the lower industrial zone's rusted factories, forgotten rail lines, miles of concrete ruins rotting into the earth. Safe, once. Now crawling with quiet menace. Black vans parked with their lights off. Pedestrians who didn't belong here loitering near alleys. Security drones buzzing louder, slower, as if daring her to move. Tessa watched from a rooftop 2 blocks away, heart pounding. Lyra was cornered. Not yet caught, but soon. Nexus wasn't playing games anymore. They wanted her. And they were willing to burn half the district to take her. Lyra slipped into the hollow shell of an abandoned train yard. She moved slowly, conserving energy, weaving between the rusted skeletons of boxcars and toppled cranes. Above her, floodlights snapped on one by one, cutting through the mist like blades. A voice echoed through hidden speakers. Theta, you are surrounded. Surrender now. You will not be harmed. A lie. Lyra knew it. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the old fear rise. The fear Samuel had bred into her. The fear Nexus wanted her to obey. And then she let it go. The voices inside her stirred once more. Amelia, you are not their creation. Lyra, you are not their weapon. Lily, you are not their prisoner. Lyra breathed in the cold, electric air. Freedom wasn't safe. It wasn't easy. It wasn't given. It was taken. It was lived. Above her, a drone zeroed in. Tactical teams shifted into position, black armor gleaming under the floodlights. A countdown began silently on encrypted channels. They thought they had her. They thought she had nowhere to go. They were wrong. Lyra moved. Not toward the trap. Not toward surrender. She ran straight for the weak spot in their net, a section of damaged fencing barely held together by rust and willful ignorance. The first shots fired, non-lethal impact rounds whistling through the air. She ducked under a toppled cargo bin, rolled across broken concrete, and hit the fence full force with her shoulder. The old metal gave way with a scream of protest. She staggered through the opening, bleeding, breathless, but free again. Tessa saw it happen. Saw the teams converge too late. Saw Lyra vanish into the smoke and steal like a ghost. And something in her heart cracked wide open. Not out of pity. Out of admiration. Out of hope. Nexus command stations lit up in silent fury. Subject escaped perimeter. Full city lockdown authorized. Priority 1 retrieval order issued. The gloves were off. The last veil had fallen. Lyra ran until the lights faded, until the sirens became a distant memory, until the city's heartbeat blurred into the steady pulse of her own survival. She didn't know where she was going. Only that it was hers to choose. And for the first time since the beginning, she smiled. The lab had gone quiet since she left. Or maybe it was the world itself that had gone quiet, outside the city, beyond the cold wind. Lyra walked alone down the shattered corridor, her bare feet silent against the smooth floor. The lights above flickered weakly, unsure whether they still had a purpose. She wasn't sure either. The message Samuel left her had been short. Not pleading. Not demanding. Just a quiet echo. You are more than I ever hoped, but I think she needs closure. Please come back. And something in her, maybe Lily, maybe Amelia, maybe something in between, had pulled her back to this place. This cage. This wound. She stepped through the threshold into the Soul Stone chamber, and the lights surged in response. The Soul Stone, floating at the center of its housing, pulsed not like a heartbeat, but like a warning. "Samuel," she called. No answer. She walked closer to the containment field. The hum of it pressed against her skin. She felt the memories in it, stirring hers and not hers, flowing like ghosts through the crystal matrix. A whisper tickled her mind. "Do not stay." She turned to leave. But the door didn't open. The panel flashed red. "Secure lockdown, override in place." She frowned, pressed her hand against the glass. "Samuel, open the door." Silence. "Samuel." The Soul Stone pulsed harder, its core beginning to crack, edges glowing white-blue. Lyra stepped back from the door, eyes darting. "You said you just wanted closure. You lied." A speaker in the ceiling clicked on, Samuel's voice trembling through static. "I didn't lie. I just couldn't let you leave again. Not like this. You're all I have left." "I'm not her," Lyra said. "I'm not Amelia. I'm not Lily. But you are. And more." She pressed her palms to the door, energy building behind her like a storm. "You can't keep me here," she said. "I know," he whispered. "And I won't." The Soul Stone let out a cracking shriek, light flooding the room. A rumble shook the chamber floor. Behind Lyra, the crystal burst into arcs of light and time, opening a tearing rift in space. It spun like a whirlpool, energy twisting into a shape that had no beginning, no end. The temperature dropped. The walls vibrated. Lyra turned slowly toward the breach. The rift pulled on her, on something deep inside her. She didn't resist. Samuel burst into the room just as her foot crossed the edge. "Eloi Ray," he shouted. She turned to him, calm, radiant in the glow. "You should have opened the door." And then she was gone, drawn into the light, her figure vanishing into the rippling vortex.